Imagine you are facing a massive, heavily armed enemy.
Yeah.
And they want nothing more than to just completely destroy you.
Right, like they hold all the power, all the resources, everything.
Exactly. They have the institutional backing. So what is your absolute best move in that situation?
I mean, instinct usually says fight back with everything you have, right? Or, turn and run away as fast as possible.
Yeah, fight or flight. But according to the incredible stack of sources we are diving into today, your most lethal weapon in that scenario is to actually immediately drop to the floor, offer your wrists, and completely surrender.
It sounds completely counterintuitive. I mean, almost suicidal on the surface.
Totally.
But the text we are analyzing today, it's this fascinating document simply titled Dominate While Seeming to Submit. And it basically argues that presenting a completely helpless or, compliant front is actually one of the most sophisticated, devastating forms of warfare ever devised.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because usually when we hear the phrase passive-aggressive, we picture something incredibly mundane and annoying.
Oh, yeah. Like the classic toxic roommate.
Right, the toxic roommate leaving a passive-aggressive sticky note on the refrigerator about doing the dishes.
Yeah.
Or, a coworker blind copying the boss on an email just to get you in trouble.
Yeah, we view it as a petty, toxic annoyance, basically a character flaw.
Exactly. But our source material, it elevates this behavior. It completely strips away the pettiness and examines it as high-level strategic warfare.
And it spans a huge timeline.
It really does. It goes from the ancient Roman Empire to 1930s India, 19th century European diplomacy, clinical psychology, and even ancient Chinese folklore.
What's fascinating here is that to understand this text, we have to fundamentally redefine what power actually looks like.
Right, because we are so conditioned, through history books and movies, to think that true power is about bending people to your will with overt force.
Yeah, it's the person shouting the loudest, the army carrying the biggest stick.
The executive banging their fists on the boardroom table, right?
Exactly. But this text posits that the most effective form of aggression is the one that is entirely hidden. True, unassailable power isn't about forcing people to bend to your will.
It's about maneuvering them so they bend to your will while they're entirely convinced it was their own idea.
Or while they view you as a completely harmless, innocent bystander who had nothing to do with it.
And the mission for our deep dive today isn't just to gawk at historical figures who pulled this off. Our goal is to dissect the mechanics of this strategy so you, the listener, can understand how to defend yourself
Against the vast legions of passive-aggressive warriors that you are undoubtedly facing in your daily life.
Right, because whether you realize it or not, this dynamic is playing out in your office, your social circles, and maybe even your home. So to survive it, we really have to understand why this strategy short-circuits the human brain so effectively.
We have to start by examining a fundamental limitation in our own cognitive models. It has to do with how we process information and threat levels.
Basically, our brains crave simplicity.
Yes, through millions of years of evolution, our brains are essentially wired to crave that simplicity. When we encounter another human being, our subconscious immediately wants to categorize them to reduce our cognitive load.
We want to put them in a neat, easily digestible box.
Exactly. We need to know, is this person good or bad? Are they nice or mean? Are they a friend or an enemy?
It is an evolutionary shortcut. Because if our ancestors on the savannah had to stop and, analyze the complex, multi-layered, ambivalent motivations of a rival tribe member running toward them.
They would have been wiped out.
Right, you'd get hit with a rock while you're psychoanalyzing them. We need that rapid-fire cognitive efficiency. Someone smiles, offers to share their food, they go into the safe box.
And if someone scowls and raises a rock, they go into the threat box.
The problem arises because reality, especially modern social reality, is never that simple.
No, it's not. Human beings are a chaotic mix of conflicting desires, insecurities, strengths, and hidden agendas.
And passive aggression weaponizes our brain's desperate need for simple categorization. It does this by being two contradictory things simultaneously.
Right. A person utilizing this strategy presents an outward exterior that is entirely obedient, friendly, accommodating, or even fiercely loving. That is the front they project.
But inwardly, and through their subtle actions, they are plotting hostile, controlling, or undermining maneuvers.
And that duality just paralyzes the victim.
It really does. When you face an aggressive attack that is perfectly disguised as compliance, your brain experiences profound cognitive dissonance.
Because you take their pleasant, smiling exterior for reality, your brain desperately wants that simple, safe interpretation.
Yeah, and then when you start to sense that something is off, when you notice the subtle sabotage, the chronic lateness, the backhanded compliments, you literally don't know how to process it.
You feel bewildered. You start to doubt your own sanity.
And you often end up feeling guilty for even suspecting this seemingly wonderful, helpful person of doing something nefarious.
The source text provides a brilliant philosophical paradigm to illustrate this concept. It draws from ancient Chinese mythology.
Which is such a cool comparison.
It is. It contrasts the Western mythological approach to problem solving with the Eastern approach. So, in Western myths, when a hero faces a massive, chaotic threat, say, Hercules facing a monster, or even humanity facing the biblical flood,
The solution is usually to build a massive barrier, gather an army, or meet force with overwhelming force.
exactly, you build a giant, impenetrable dam to stop the raging floodwaters. You fight the chaos head on.
But in the Chinese mythological tradition outlined in the text, we look at figures like Huang Ti, the legendary Yellow Emperor, and his successors.
Right. They didn't bring harmony from chaos through epic bloodshed or by building massive walls. They did it by adapting and yielding to natural conditions.
The text specifically highlights a figure named Yu the Sage. He was appointed by the emperor to engineer an end to a massive, catastrophic flood known as the Deluge.
And you, the sage, understands what the text calls the way of heaven. He knows that if you build a dam, you are simply challenging the water to a contest of strength.
But you're going to lose.
Right, because the water will pool, the pressure will build to an unimaginable degree, and eventually the dam will shatter, causing even more devastation.
So instead of fighting the water, Yu the Sage yields to it. He observes the natural flow and clears a wider, deeper channel for the water to rush into.
He gives the destructive energy a path of least resistance.
There is a specific translation of an image text provided in our sources that spells out the philosophy perfectly. It reads, "The river. It flows with great force. Try to dam it, and you only add to its pent-up energy and increase your risk. Instead, divert its course, make its power serve your purposes."
It's brilliant.
It makes me think of conversational martial arts. Like if you look at the physical mechanics of a martial art like judo or aikido, the entire philosophy is built on this river concept.
Yeah, how so?
Well, if a larger, stronger opponent lunges at you and throws a heavy punch, your natural instinct is to throw your forearm up and rigidly block it. That is damming the river.
Ah, I see.
You are meeting their kinetic energy with your own rigidity, and the result is usually a broken bone or you getting knocked backward by their sheer mass.
Right, because the kinetic energy has to go somewhere, and if you block it, it absorbs directly into your body.
Exactly. But in judo, when that massive opponent lunges, you don't offer a rigid block. You present a yielding front. You step slightly out of the way, you grab their wrist, and you actually pull them forward in the exact direction they are already moving.
So you yield to their momentum. You channel their river.
Yes. Because you offered no resistance, they have nothing to push against. Their own momentum carries them past you, their center of gravity collapses, and they throw themselves face first onto the mat.
Wow.
You dominate them completely by refusing to meet their aggression with your own.
The physical mechanics of that throw perfectly mirror the psychological mechanics of passive aggression. By presenting a compliant, agreeable front, you offer your aggressor absolutely nothing to push against.
Right, because people expecting a fight brace themselves for an impact.
And when the impact never comes, they stumble forward into the void you created. They lose their emotional and strategic balance.
And while they are flailing in that state of confusion, you are the one quietly dictating the terms of the engagement.
That framework is incredibly helpful for understanding the theory.
It really is. But how does this scale? I mean, if yielding to nature is how ancient sages tamed mythological floods, how does a modern flesh and blood strategist yield to a massive, heavily armed, globe-spanning empire?
That is the big question.
Because that question leads us into the historical meat of our sources, focusing on a man who elevated this concept to an art form on the world stage.
Yes. To see this strategy executed flawlessly at scale, we have to examine Mahatma Gandhi and his confrontation with the British Empire, specifically focusing on the chronological escalation of the 1930 Salt March.
And it is important to establish the parameters of our analysis here for the listener. We are looking at this historical event strictly through the lens of strategy.
Right. We are examining the tactical chess match as detailed in the source document, without injecting modern moral judgments or taking political sides.
We're just looking at the board, the pieces, and the moves. So in December of 1929, the British officers governing the Indian subcontinent are sitting on a powder keg, and they know it.
They really do. The Indian National Congress had just issued a demand for total independence from British rule, and they formally asked Gandhi to organize and lead a nationwide civil disobedience campaign to force the issue.
The British administration is expecting an absolute nightmare scenario. The global economy is fragile, England's finances are strained, and the authorities are terrified that Gandhi is going to launch a massive, coordinated boycott.
A boycott of British goods that would cripple their trade. Or worse, incite violent, armed riots across the major cities.
So the man tasked with handling this impending crisis is Lord Edward Irwin, the British Viceroy of India. Irwin is the embodiment of imperial power. He commands the police, the military, the administrative bureaucracy.
He is sitting in his palatial estate, basically bracing for impact.
Yeah, he has his forces on high alert, fully prepared to respond to a nationwide uprising rapidly and with overwhelming force. He is waiting to see where Gandhi will strike first, anticipating a massive blow.
And weeks go by in tense silence. The anticipation is agonizing for the British administration. Finally, on March 2nd, a letter arrives on Irwin's desk from Gandhi himself.
You can imagine Irwin tearing open this envelope, right? Expecting a fiery manifesto or a declaration of total war.
Oh, totally. But the source text describes Gandhi's letter as, quote, rather touching in its honesty and remarkably polite.
Gandhi doesn't declare war. He doesn't announce a boycott. He cordially informs the viceroy that he intends to protest the salt tax.
And for context for you listening, the British held a strict monopoly on the production and sale of salt in India, and they taxed it heavily.
Because salt is a biological necessity, especially in a sweltering climate, this tax was a massive daily financial burden on the absolute poorest citizens of India.
So Gandhi outlines his plan in the letter with complete transparency. He tells Irwin that he, along with a small group of his followers from his ashram, will embark on a 200-mile walk to the coastal town of Dandi.
Once they arrive at the beach, they will bend down, gather sea salt from the shore, and thereby technically break the law by producing untaxed salt.
Gandhi even adds a line saying essentially that all of this unpleasantness could be easily prevented if Irwin would simply agree to repeal the salt tax.
Irwin reads this letter, and the text notes he felt an immense wave of relief. He thought the planned protest seemed ludicrously small, almost pathetic.
Right. Here he was expecting a continent-wide violent rebellion. And instead, a 60-year-old man, frail and leaning on a bamboo cane, is politely asking for permission to go on a long hike with 80 ragtag followers to pick up some sand on a beach.
Even Gandhi's own political allies within the Indian National Congress were deeply disappointed and confused. They thought he had lost his nerve, or perhaps his mind.
But Irwin, as a strategist, has to formulate a response. He convenes with his advisors. He looks at his options.
He could order the immediate arrest of Gandhi and his followers the moment they step out of the ashram.
But what does that look like on the global stage? Arresting a sanely aging philosopher and a small band of peaceful devotees, many of whom were women, for simply going on a walk.
It would look incredibly heavy-handed. It would paint the British as tyrannical bullies panicking over nothing.
So Irwin decides the most strategic, sophisticated move is to do absolutely nothing. He will not build a dam. He will ignore the trickle of water.
He decides to let the old man walk, let the media get bored, let the tiny protest fizzle out in the blazing heat, and allow Gandhi to completely discredit himself through failure.
But that decision was the exact trap Gandhi had set. He chose an issue, the salt tax, that the British aristocracy viewed as a trivial administrative detail, but which resonated on a visceral, daily level with the hundreds of millions of impoverished Indians.
By announcing a seemingly harmless, easily dismissible plan in advance, Gandhi ensured the British would lower their guard.
Exactly. He bought himself the critical time and physical space needed to develop the march without the threat of immediate military repression crushing it in its infancy.
With that space secured, Gandhi begins to escalate the rhetoric and the imagery, but strictly within the bounds of nonviolence. He frames this 200-mile walk not just as a political protest, but as a holy pilgrimage.
He employs deep religious symbolism that speaks directly to the soul of the Indian populace. He compares their journey to Lord Buddha's historical marches, or Lord Rama's mythical retreat.
He starts using apocalyptic language in his daily speeches along the route, calling it a battle of right against might, of truth against darkness.
And this framing electrifies the rural poor who begin flocking to the dirt roads to hear him speak.
He also understands modern optics better than anyone in the British administration. He calls in the international press. He invites American and European film crews and newspaper reporters to walk alongside them.
He turns this quiet march into a globally syndicated media spectacle.
And meanwhile, Irwin is sitting in his palace watching the crowd swell, and he is paralyzed by his initial decision. He still feels he cannot touch the marchers.
To understand why Irwin was so paralyzed, we have to analyze the specific psychological weapon Gandhi deployed. The text references a concept formulated decades later by the political strategist Saul Alinsky.
Right, which he called the guilt weapon.
Yes, Gandhi executed a masterclass in psychological profiling. He understood the self-image of his enemy perfectly.
The British elite did not view themselves as ruthless conquerors. They saw themselves as highly civilized, liberal upholders of law, order, and freedom.
They justified their vast empire through a paternalistic belief that they were a civilizing force, bringing infrastructure, education, and moral elevation to the world. They prided themselves on an aristocratic tradition of fair play and justice.
If the Indian population had risen up violently, burning buildings and attacking British officers, the British military would have mobilized, crushed the rebellion with artillery and cavalry, and gone to sleep that night feeling completely morally justified.
Because their self-image as civilized protectors would have remained perfectly intact. In their minds, they would simply be restoring order against violent, chaotic insurgents.
But Gandhi removed the violence. By offering absolutely zero physical resistance, he short-circuited the entire psychological mechanism the British used to justify their rule.
To unleash heavily armed soldiers against unarmed, peaceful, praying marchers simply does not compute within a civilized Englishman's sense of moral purity.
Gandhi exploited their liberal ambivalence. By making himself appear entirely benign, gentle, and passive, he disarmed their physical military advantage and launched a devastating attack on their psychological defenses.
He trapped them in their own moral framework and paralyzed them with guilt.
The mechanics of the march show how this pressure built. They set out on March 12, 1930. As they travel from village to village, the momentum grows exponentially.
The 80 followers become hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands.
University students are abandoning their studies to join the procession. Mayors of local villages are resigning their government posts in solidarity as Gandhi passes through.
Gandhi's speeches become more inflammatory, almost begging the British authorities to arrest him, daring them to prove they are tyrants.
On April 6th, they finally reach the coastal waters of Dandi. Gandhi wades into the ocean, picks up a lump of salt-rich mud, boils it, and formally breaks the law.
And word of this defiance ripples across the entire subcontinent via telegraph and word of mouth.
The situation for Lord Irwin transitions from mild annoyance to full-blown panic. The realization dawns on him that he has been entirely outmaneuvered.
By choosing the passive route initially, he allowed a massive, unstoppable momentum to build. If he had arrested Gandhi on the very first day, it would have been a minor, localized news story.
Now, the entire Indian populace is engaged, and the eyes of the world are watching.
If Irwin orders Gandhi's arrest now, it will likely spark the very nationwide conflagration he was trying to avoid. But if he continues to do nothing, he looks incredibly weak.
Right, signaling to the world that British law is meaningless and effectively ceding control of India to a man with a walking stick. Every option available to Irwin now guarantees a loss.
The civil disobedience cascades. People up and down the coast start producing illegal salt. The boycotts of British goods that Irwin originally feared finally begin to materialize organically.
The British administration, backed into a corner of their own making, finally responds with the only tool they have left: force. On May 4th, under the cover of darkness, heavily armed police surround Gandhi's camp and arrest him.
But Gandhi had already set the next phase of the plan in motion. This leads to the brutal climax of this entire strategy on May 21st at the Dharasana Salt Works.
The events at Dharasana illustrate the terrifying power of passive aggression when taken to its absolute extreme.
Approximately 2,500 Indian protesters, now led by Gandhi's appointed successors, march peacefully toward a major, government-run salt factory.
The factory is heavily fortified, surrounded by ditches and barbed wire, and guarded by hundreds of armed Indian constables commanded by British officers.
As the marchers approach the perimeter, the officers order the constables to charge. The guards rush forward and begin striking the marchers with steel-plated Lathy's heavy bamboo clubs.
And the demonstrators, who had been strictly instructed in Gandhi's methods, make absolutely no attempt to raise their arms to defend themselves.
They do not block, they do not fight back, they do not even flinch. They simply walk forward and submit to the shattering blows.
The accounts from the journalists who witnessed it, which are referenced in the text, describe it as a profoundly nauseating, psychologically scarring scene.
The marchers advance in columns. The first wave is beaten to the ground, suffering fractured skulls and crushed shoulders.
As medics drag the unconscious and bleeding bodies away, the next column quietly steps forward to take their place, absorbing the beatings until almost everyone has been clubbed down.
And the American and European reporters are standing right there, recording the horrific sounds of steel striking bone and transmitting the story across the globe.
The psychological fallout was catastrophic for the British. The sight of unresisting bodies being systematically brutalized destroyed any lingering sentimental or moral attachment the Indian people had toward English rule.
And it utterly horrified the international community, particularly the American public, whose support Britain desperately needed.
I have to pause here, though, and push back on the premise, because we are talking about dominating a situation. But if we look at the immediate, tangible outcome for the Indians...
Right, I see where you're going.
I mean, Gandhi is sitting in a prison cell without a trial where he will stay for nearly a year. Thousands of his devoted followers are lying in makeshift hospitals with severe, life-altering injuries.
The British still hold the factory.
They still hold the factory. They still have their army. To an outside observer looking at the casualty list, the British won a decisive victory. How can we possibly classify suffering brutal beatings and imprisonment as dominating the enemy?
That is the core paradox of the strategy, and to resolve it, the source text provides a brilliant insight from the psychotherapist J. Haley. He dissects the specific emotional state of an aggressor who strikes a passive victim.
Okay, what does he say?
Haley notes, it is impossible to win a contest with a helpless opponent, since if you win, you have won nothing. Each blow you strike is unreturned, so that all you can feel is guilt for having struck, while at the same time experiencing the uneasy suspicion that the helplessness is calculated.
The uneasy suspicion that the helplessness is calculated, that is a chilling phrase.
It is. It changes everything about the dynamic. Consider the emotional state of the British officers and the constables swinging the clubs. They won the physical terrain. The factory was secure.
But they lost the moral and strategic war completely and irreparably.
Exactly. When an aggressor strikes an opponent who aggressively fights back, the aggressor's adrenaline masks their conscience. It feels like survival.
But when an aggressor strikes someone who refuses to hit back, the aggression hangs in the air, naked and ugly.
The British forces were paralyzed by the horrific reality of their own actions. The guilt and public shaming eroded their political will. Shortly after, the British government was forced to release Gandhi and invite him to the negotiating table as an equal.
Which was an entirely unprecedented concession for an imperial viceroy. The Salt March broke the psychological hold of the British Raj.
Gandhi yielded, he took the horrific blows, and in doing so, he channeled the immense, violent power of the British Empire right off a moral cliff.
He weaponized their own rigid moral code and their desperate need to view themselves as the good guys. He completely dominated the entire paradigm of the conflict by enforcing absolute passivity.
However, the text requires us to examine a darker application of this concept. Gandhi utilized passive resistance against a vastly superior, hostile enemy to secure freedom for his people.
But what happens when a strategist uses that exact same methodology against an ally?
What if you use compliance not to win independence, but to trap a partner in a web of your own design to maintain your own power?
This shifts our focus to a completely different arena. We're moving from the dusty roads of 1930s India back to the opulent palaces of 1820s Europe, for what the sources detail as perhaps the ultimate diplomatic trap.
To understand the stakes, we have to establish the intense geopolitical anxiety of Europe in 1820. The continent is exhausted.
They have just spent decades tearing themselves apart during the French Revolution and the subsequent Napoleonic Wars.
The monarchs of Europe, specifically the conservative powers of England, Austria, and Prussia, have finally managed to defeat Napoleon, put the kings back on their thrones, and stabilize the map. They crave order, tradition, and absolute quiet.
They are deeply traumatized by the memory of the French Revolution.
Yeah.
I mean, the image of King Louis XVI getting his head chopped off by a radical mob in 1793 is burned into their collective consciousness.
So when new liberal revolutions suddenly break out in 1820 in the kingdoms of Spain and Naples, forcing those monarchs to accept constitutional limits on their power, the leaders of the great conservative empires are terrified.
They feel the tide of revolution rising again, and their immediate instinct is to crush it before it spreads.
But the situation is massively complicated by the intervention of Tsar Alexander I of the Russian Empire. Alexander commands the largest, most battle-tested, and most feared military force on the European continent.
He looks at the unrest in Spain and Naples and proposes a solution that terrifies his conservative allies even more than the revolutions themselves. He offers to march his massive Russian army across Europe to intervene in these sovereign nations.
On paper, if you are a conservative king who wants a rebellion crushed, a massive Russian army volunteering to do the dirty work sounds like a gift.
But Alexander isn't just a military commander. He is a man driven by extreme, almost erratic ideology.
Alexander possessed a profound messiah complex. He viewed himself not merely as an emperor, but as a Christian crusader, divinely appointed to save Europe.
He didn't just want to march his army in to shoot the rebels and restore the old dictatorships. He wanted to use his military leverage to force the kings of Spain and Naples to enact enlightened liberal constitutions.
He envisioned creating a utopian Christian brotherhood of wise, gentle rulers spanning the continent, with himself naturally acting as the spiritual and military supreme leader of this new order.
He is highly emotional, deeply religious, and absolutely convinced he is executing the will of God.
The other leaders of Europe view him as an absolute menace. The English foreign minister is frantically writing letters, practically begging Alexander to stay in Russia and mind his own business.
The various ambassadors are trying to argue with him, pointing out the logistical nightmares and the dangerous precedents of his plan, hoping to show a united logical front to force him to back down. Everyone is trying to build a dam to stop the Russian tide.
Everyone, that is, except for one statesman.
Prince Clement von Metternich, the foreign minister of the Austrian Empire.
The sources paint Metternich as the quintessential cold-blooded realist. He is an arch-conservative who despises the chaotic messiness of democracy or liberal reform.
He wants the exact opposite of what the Tsar wants. Metternich wants absolute monarchy maintained everywhere, and he absolutely cannot abide the thought of a massive Russian army marching through Austrian territory to spread liberal ideals.
Metternich is faced with a terrifying puzzle. How do you stop an incredibly powerful, deeply emotional autocrat who commands the largest army in the world and believes he is on a mission from God?
Metternich observes the English trying to argue with the Tsar, using logic and treaties. But Metternich is a master psychologist.
He knows that if you argue with someone who is governed by intense emotion and insecurity, you will only trigger their defensiveness.
If you tell a man with a messiah complex that his plan is foolish, you feed his paranoia, you push him further toward radical action just to prove you wrong, and you guarantee he will view you as an enemy of God.
We are back to the philosophy of the river. If Metternich tries to construct a diplomatic dam, the Tsar's pent-up ideological energy will shatter it and wash the Austrian Empire away.
So Metternich decides to grab the shovel and widen the channel.
He executes a maneuver that completely baffles his allies. Instead of pushing back, Metternich sends messages enthusiastically agreeing with the Tsar.
He tells Alexander that his vision is brilliant. He fully supports the Tsar's call for a grand international conference of the major powers to discuss the spiritual and political future of Europe.
Metternich even graciously offers to host this monumental summit in the Austrian-held city of Troppau, ensuring the game is played on his home turf.
The Tsar is ecstatic. I mean, he has been receiving nothing but pushback and cold shoulders from the English and the French, and now, finally, the brilliant Metternich recognizes his divine genius.
Alexander travels to Troppau, expecting a grand coronation of his ideas, but when he arrives, the reality of international politics sets in.
The French and Prussian representatives are evasive and noncommittal. The English think the whole thing is absurd and refuse to even send a high-level delegation.
The Tsar finds himself socially and politically isolated. His grand crusade is being ignored, and in that moment of vulnerability and frustration, who swoops in to offer comfort and a sympathetic ear? Metternich
approaches the isolated Tsar and suggests they bypass the frustrating bureaucracy of the other nations and hold private, one-on-one meetings, just the two of them.
They lock themselves in Metternich's opulent private rooms for hours on end, day after day, and it is inside these locked rooms that the genius of Metternich's passive-aggressive strategy is unleashed.
The Tsar, eager to finally be heard, does almost all of the talking. He paces the room, passionately explaining his vague, sweeping visions for a liberal Christian brotherhood.
And Metternich simply sits there. He listens with rapt attention. He nods thoughtfully. He sighs at the appropriate moments. He offers total agreement and validation.
The text actually compares Metternich's behavior in these meetings to Proteus, the shape-shifting god of the sea from Greek mythology. He becomes a perfect mirror for the Tsar's emotions.
He provides a completely passive, compliant front. He offers absolutely no resistance, giving the Tsar's intellectual and emotional energy nowhere to crash, allowing it to just flow harmlessly out into the room.
But that agreeable facade is only the passive component of the strategy. While he is nodding and mirroring, Metternich is running a highly aggressive, deeply manipulative operation in the shadows.
Step one was completed the moment they locked the door. He had successfully isolated the Tsar from any other advisors or differing viewpoints, making Alexander completely dependent on Metternich for intellectual validation.
Step two involves subtly infecting the Tsar's mind with a new narrative.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of this because it sounds like a literal Jedi mind trick. How exactly do you hijack the ideology of an emperor while pretending to agree with him?
What are the specific levers Metternich is pulling?
It requires immense patience and surgical conversational precision. Metternich doesn't attack the Tsar's desire to be a savior, he embraces it.
Right.
During one of these long sessions, Metternich adopts a grave, sorrowful tone and confesses to the Tsar that he too sees a terrifying moral danger brewing across Europe. He validates the Tsar's premise that Europe needs spiritual saving.
But Metternich subtly shifts the definition of the threat. He gently suggests that the danger isn't a lack of liberal constitutions. He tells the Tsar that a godless, anarchic spirit of revolution is the true scourge of their time.
He uses heavily religious language, knowing his audience, suggesting that giving in to these radical democratic spirits is quite literally satanic.
To drive the point home, Metternich mentions a recent, relatively minor mutiny that had broken out in a regiment of the Tsar's own Russian guards back home.
Metternich frames this not as a local dispute, but as proof that the satanic revolutionary infection is creeping toward Russia itself.
He takes the Tsar's massive, surging river of moral fervor, his desperate need to lead a holy crusade, and he quietly digs a new trench, redirecting that exact same energy toward a completely different target.
He tells the Tsar, "You are absolutely a savior, but the dragon you need to slay isn't conservative tradition. The dragon is the very liberal revolution you were thinking about supporting."
He flatters the Tsar's ego to an extreme degree, assuring Alexander that only he, with his immense moral fortitude and military might, can serve as the leader of a counter-revolutionary crusade to protect the soul of Europe from this satanic chaos.
The Tsar gets completely swept up in the reflection of his own greatness that Metternich is holding up. Suddenly, Alexander decides that perhaps now isn't the right time to experiment with liberal constitutions.
The priority must be halting the revolutionary tide to protect the Christian order. The Tsar undergoes a complete ideological inversion without ever realizing he was pushed. He repents of his liberal sympathies.
And then Metternich brings the final masterpiece of the trap. In 1821, a new liberal revolution breaks out in the region of Piedmont.
Metternich doesn't try to keep the Russians out. Instead, he formally invites the Russian army to march south and help the Austrian forces crush the uprising.
The Tsar, fully believing he is acting as the savior of Europe, sends 90,000 Russian troops. The rebellion is brutally suppressed.
The Russian troops, having done Austria's dirty work, politely withdraw back to their borders. And the Tsar feels incredibly proud of his decisive action.
But look at the staggering reality of what Metternich achieved. The liberal factions across Europe, who previously viewed Tsar Alexander as their powerful champion and savior, watch in horror as he deploys 90,000 troops to massacre a liberal rebellion.
He permanently alienates his entire base of ideological support. Metternich tricked his most dangerous rival into becoming the brutal enforcer of the Austrian conservative status quo.
The text highlights a quote from Henry Kissinger analyzing this exact event, where Kissinger concludes that Metternich successfully killed Russian liberalism and completely dominated Austria's greatest threat, all while operating entirely in the guise of a submissive, admiring ally.
It perfectly encapsulates the dual nature of passive aggression. The passive front is the agreeable, flattering mirror. It gives the opponent nothing to fight and disarms their suspicions.
And the aggressive front operates underneath, isolating the target, altering their perception of reality, and luring them into taking actions that ultimately serve your strategic goals while leaving them convinced they have won a great victory.
It is terrifyingly effective. It makes you reconsider every conversation you've ever had with someone who enthusiastically agrees with all your complaints.
Definitely. But Metternich required long, intimate conversations and deep psychological profiling to pull this off. Our sources detail another avenue for creating that necessary space to pull the strings, and it might be even more devious because it requires fewer words.
Metternich flattered his enemy. What if, instead, you simply convince your opponent that they have already defeated you entirely?
This represents a brilliant tactical pivot in the source material, moving into the strategy of the false surrender and manufactured reluctance.
The core mechanism here is about aggressively lowering your opponent's guard by manipulating the psychology of victory. The text offers a profound example from the theater of war. We look to the island of Haiti in 1802 and the actions of a general named Jean-Jacques Dessalines.
The context of the Haitian Revolution is crucial here. The enslaved population of Haiti had risen up and fought a grueling, bloody war for liberation against the massive French military machine sent by Napoleon Bonaparte.
After years of brutal combat, the French forces managed a massive strategic victory. They captured the brilliant rebel leader Toussaint Louverture and shipped him to a prison in France.
With their central leader gone, the rebellion fractured and appeared to be entirely crushed. Dessalines, one of Toussaint's top generals, is left commanding a severely weakened force facing an overwhelming, heavily armed French army.
If he fights a pitched battle, he and his men will be annihilated.
So Dessalines analyzes the board, realizes he cannot win a contest of force, and he surrenders. He waves the white flag.
But he goes far beyond a simple cessation of hostilities. A simple surrender leaves the victors suspicious. They keep their troops garrisoned and their rifles loaded, waiting for a guerrilla counterattack.
Dessalines doesn't just lay down his arms, he actively joins the French army. He pledges absolute loyalty to the French commanders.
He utilizes his intimate knowledge of the local terrain to help the French forces hunt down and eradicate the remaining stubborn pockets of rebel resistance.
He presents a front of absolute subservient submission. The French commanders are thrilled. They decorate him, they praise his pragmatism, and crucially, they begin to trust him completely.
This highlights the psychology of the victor that the text explores. When a military force, or even just a person in an argument, finally wins a grueling conflict, they experience a massive flood of adrenaline and triumph, followed almost immediately by extreme emotional and physical exhaustion.
They desperately want to relax. They want the vigilance to end. They want to unlace their boots and lower their guard.
When a bitter enemy not only surrenders but actively begins serving you, you are highly inclined to take it at face value because your brain is exhausted and craving the safety of peace.
And because you cannot read minds, you can only judge an opponent by their observable actions. Dessalines' daily actions loudly broadcasted, "I am your loyal, defeated servant."
But in secret, beneath that compliant front, he was running a massive aggressive operation.
Every time his forces captured a cache of weapons from the remaining rebels, he would make a great show of handing a portion of the muskets over to the French commanders to maintain his cover, while quietly hoarding the vast majority of the armaments in hidden mountain caves.
He used the freedom of movement granted to him by the French to secretly recruit and train a massive new army in the remote, inaccessible areas of the island.
He used his submission to buy himself the two things he desperately needed: time and unmonitored space. He waited patiently for the inevitable outbreak of yellow fever to sweep through the European ranks.
An illness the local population was largely immune to, but which devastated the French soldiers. He waited until the French forces were decimated by disease, their morale was broken, and their guard was completely non-existent.
And only then, when they were at their absolute weakest, did he drop the subservient mask. He retrieved the hoarded weapons, launched a massive surprise offensive, and ultimately shattered the French army, liberating Haiti permanently.
The false surrender is the ultimate emotional distraction. It exploits the enemy's desire for the conflict to be over.
But you don't have to be commanding troops in a literal war to utilize the mechanics of surrender or feigned weakness. You can feign defeat, or you can feign a complete, pathetic lack of ambition.
This brings us into the political arena, and a masterclass in manufactured reluctance, performed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the summer of 1940.
The political landscape of 1940 is fascinating. FDR is wrapping up his second term as President of the United States.
At this specific moment in American history, there is an unwritten, yet practically ironclad tradition that no president ever seeks a third term. George Washington established the precedent by stepping down after 2 terms, and every single president for 150 years had followed suit.
To openly demand a third term would be viewed as a shocking breach of democratic norms. FDR's critics were already loudly accusing him of harboring dictatorial tendencies and expanding executive power too far.
But look at the global reality. Europe has plunged into the catastrophic violence of World War II. The United States is still navigating the lingering economic trauma of the Great Depression.
FDR deeply believes that his steady hand is required to navigate these existential crises. He desperately wants that third term. He wants to finish the job.
However, if he holds a press conference, formally declares his candidacy, and actively campaigns for the nomination, he will be painted as a tyrant clinging to power. He will spark a massive, bloody civil war within his own Democratic Party.
Alienating key allies and potentially losing the general election, he cannot dam the river of tradition, so he utilizes passive aggression.
In the grueling months leading up to the Democratic National Convention, FDR adopts a posture of complete disinterest. He loudly and repeatedly assures reporters and party bosses that he has absolutely no interest in running again.
He tells everyone he is exhausted and looking forward to retiring to his estate in Hyde Park. He even actively encourages several other prominent Democrats to run for the nomination, offering them mild encouragement.
But FDR is a master of nuanced language. While he constantly signals his desire to retire, he never issues a Sherman-esque statement. He never completely, unequivocally, 100% closes the door.
By encouraging multiple different candidates to enter the race, he ensures the party's delegates are heavily fragmented. No single alternative candidate can secure a clear majority of support.
The convention finally opens in Chicago, and FDR executes his most brilliant maneuver. He simply doesn't show up. He stays in Washington.
By absenting himself, he creates a massive, suffocating vacuum of leadership in the arena. The source text notes that without FDR's dominating presence, the convention floor felt incomparably dull and directionless.
The delegates are sitting in this sweltering hall, sweating, uninspired by the fragmented field of candidates, and beginning to panic about who will lead them against the Republicans in the midst of a global crisis.
FDR purposefully lets them stew in that anxiety. He lets their desperation for his proven leadership build to an agonizing fever pitch.
It's the psychological equivalent of pulling the oxygen out of the room so everyone starts gasping. And then, at the precise moment of maximum anxiety, FDR delivers the theatrical masterstroke.
He arranges for his close ally, Senator Alban Barkley, to deliver an address to the exhausted convention. Barkley steps to the podium and reads a message directly from the president.
The exact phrasing is vital. The message states, "The president has never had, and has not today, any desire or purpose to continue in the office of president, to be a candidate for that office, or to be nominated by the convention for that office."
He officially surrenders the field. He formally announces in front of the entire party, "I do not want this power," and the psychological result is explosive.
There's a moment of stunned silence in the hall, and then the entire convention floor absolutely erupts. The delegates, terrified of facing the future without him, start screaming, "We want Roosevelt!"
The chant echoes through the arena for an hour. It becomes a frenzy. The very next day, the delegates practically shove aside the other candidates, force FDR's name onto the ballot, and draft him as their nominee by an overwhelming landslide.
He achieved his exact, highly ambitious goal. He secured the unprecedented third term. But he maneuvered the situation so brilliantly that it appeared as though the Democratic Party had practically dragged him out of retirement and forced the crown onto his head against his deepest wishes.
If he had aggressively demanded the power, he would have been attacked as a power-hungry dictator. By pretending he found the power burdensome and unwanted, he transformed himself into their reluctant, indispensable savior.
It is the exact same playbook used in antiquity. The text provides 2 rapid-fire examples from the Roman Empire that mirror this perfectly.
Julius Caesar is facing a dangerous mutiny from his most seasoned, battle-hardened legion. They march all the way to Rome, demanding an immediate discharge, claiming they are overworked and underpaid.
Caesar understands that if he argues with them or if he threatens them with punishment, they will violently rebel and he will lose his best soldiers, so he doesn't fight.
He walks out to address the angry mob, looking completely tranquil, and calmly announces, "You desire your discharge. You have it. I discharge you all." He immediately grants their demand.
But he adds a psychological knife twist. He refers to them casually as citizens, stripping them of the honored title of fellow soldiers that they prized above all else.
It is devastating psychological warfare. By offering zero resistance to their demand, he removes their momentum. By casually stripping them of their identity and demonstrating that he doesn't need them, he completely shatters their collective will.
The soldiers were so emotionally disoriented by his rapid compliance that they instantly regretted the mutiny and literally begged him to take them back into his service.
And his heir, Augustus Caesar, pulled the exact same trick on the entire Roman Senate. Augustus systematically eliminated all his political rivals, secured total control of the military, and essentially ended the Roman Republic.
Then he walked into the Senate chamber, stood before the terrified politicians, and formally renounced all his sweeping powers. He announced, "I am stepping down. I give the Republic back to you."
And the Senate, terrified of plunging back into the bloody chaos of civil war without his strong hand, fell over themselves, begging him to maintain absolute dictatorial control.
The lesson woven through all these examples is profound, and the text summarizes it perfectly with a quote from the Book of Psalms. "His speech was smoother than butter, yet war was in his heart."
Overtly displaying your ambition, being visibly desperate for power, wealth, or a promotion, makes you a target. It triggers the defensive instincts of everyone around you. It invites resistance.
But disguising those maneuvers, making it appear as though you don't want the power, or that you are simply a passive vessel accepting it because the situation demands it, is an incredibly sophisticated, almost unblockable form of aggression.
This is all incredibly fascinating historical analysis, but I have to bring us back down to earth here. We have spent an hour dissecting the strategies of Roman emperors, global revolutionaries, and wartime presidents.
But you, the listener, and I, we're not commanding legions, and we are not trying to secure a third term in the Oval Office. Or how does this massive strategic concept translate to the mundane reality of our lives?
It translates perfectly because the exact same psychological dynamics are playing out in our homes, in our romantic relationships, and in our office cubicles every single day.
The critical warning the source material provides is that while historical figures like Metternich or FDR utilize this as a highly conscious, deliberate strategy, the vast majority of the passive aggression you face in daily life is semi-conscious or even entirely unconscious.
People use it because it works, often without fully understanding the mechanics of why.
This transitions us smoothly into the microaggressions of daily life. And the text provides a brilliant bridge example from the workplace, looking at the legendary film director Alfred Hitchcock.
Hitchcock provides a perfect example of managing upward through passive aggression. During his Hollywood career, Hitchcock frequently clashed with a highly powerful, notoriously meddlesome producer named David O. Selznick.
Selznick was a micromanager. He loved to take Hitchcock's carefully planned scripts and alter them to his own liking. Worse, Selznick would frequently show up unannounced on the movie set, stand right behind Hitchcock, and dictate exactly how a scene should be shot.
Now, a more conventional, ego-driven director would have stopped production, gotten into a massive screaming match with the producer in front of the entire crew, asserted their artistic authority, and demanded creative control.
But Hitchcock understood the power dynamics.
Yeah.
If he engaged in an overt, aggressive shouting match, he risked getting fired. Selznick signed the checks.
Even if he wasn't fired, he would create a deeply hostile, miserable working environment that would ruin the film. So Hitchcock utilized the yielding strategy.
When Selznick marched onto the set and demanded a script change, Hitchcock would not argue. He would present a completely warm, accommodating front. He would enthusiastically agree to shoot the scene exactly the way Selznick envisioned it.
But wait, I have to challenge this strategy. The text notes that Hitchcock would happily set up the shot, but then, miraculously, the incredibly expensive camera would suddenly malfunction.
Or, in an even bolder move, Hitchcock would instruct the crew to run the camera without any film loaded inside it. They would spend hours shooting the scene exactly as the producer wanted, but recording absolutely nothing.
That sounds incredibly petty, and honestly, wasting thousands of dollars of studio time and equipment just to avoid a verbal argument doesn't sound like a brilliant strategy. It sounds cowardly.
It looks cowardly if you only measure power through overt dominance. But look at the psychological return on investment Hitchcock secured. When Selznick eventually went into the editing room weeks later and discovered the footage was ruined or missing, it was far too late and far too expensive to rebuild the sets and reshoot the scene.
Hitchcock ultimately got his way. His original vision ended up in the film. But crucially, he maintained his relationship with the producer. He never challenged Selznick's authority.
He played the role of the innocent, frustrated artist victimized by technical difficulties. "Oh no, David, the camera broke. What a tragedy. We'll just have to use the other take." He achieved total artistic control while allowing the producer to believe he was still in charge.
It is the perfect, untraceable sabotage. But the text plunges even deeper into the darkness, moving from the office into the intimate realm of personal relationships. It brings back psychotherapist Jay Haley to describe a relationship dynamic that devolves into what he terms psychopathological.
Haley outlines a deeply unsettling scenario that many therapists encounter. In any marriage or close partnership, the two individuals have to constantly negotiate who controls what, who manages the finances, who dictates the social calendar, who handles the chores.
That negotiation is entirely normal. However, Haley states that a relationship becomes toxic or psychopathological when one partner systematically maneuvers to control the other's behavior while simultaneously explicitly denying that they are exercising any control whatsoever.
Haley provides a textbook clinical example of a wife who suddenly develops mysterious dizzy spells, crippling anxiety attacks, or an obscure, undiagnosable allergy whenever she's required to do something she dislikes.
Let's break down the mechanics of how that traps the victim. Say the husband wants to go to a party or wants her to handle a difficult phone call. She suddenly feels dizzy and has to lie down.
She forces him to cancel his plans to stay home and care for her, or forces him to handle the stressful task. She is completely circumscribing his behavior. She is dictating his schedule with absolute authority, but she is executing this control from a position of undeniable physical weakness.
That is the genius of the trap. She denies she's controlling him. If he complains, she says, "I can't help having these dizzy spells. I can't help my anxiety. Why are you attacking me when I'm sick?"
The husband is placed in an impossible psychological bind. He cannot openly acknowledge that she is controlling him because her behavior is allegedly an involuntary medical condition.
And he cannot refuse to comply with her silent demands because what kind of monstrous husband abandons their frail, suffering spouse in their moment of need? She wields absolute dictatorial power over his life by weaponizing her own helplessness.
The Chinese folklore referenced in the text has a specific archetype for this exact personality. They call it the smiling tiger.
It describes a person who presents a beaming, friendly, gentle face to the world, but harbors a ruthless, cruel, and controlling heart. They use their benign exterior to mask deeply aggressive maneuvers. And when we look around our modern world, it feels like we are surrounded by smiling tigers.
And we must ask why this specific behavioral strategies has become so incredibly pervasive in modern society. The expert analysis drawn from sociology and psychology is that modern civilized society has heavily, systematically outlawed overt aggression.
We cannot resolve our disputes with physical violence. We cannot challenge a rude coworker to a duel. Furthermore, our corporate and social cultures heavily penalize verbal aggression.
We are terrified of being labeled toxic, of being reported to human resources, or of being ostracized by our peer groups. There is immense suffocating pressure to be universally pleasant, accommodating, and a team player at all times.
But the core reality is that human nature hasn't fundamentally changed just because we invented HR departments. We still have deeply ingrained aggressive impulses. We still experience intense anger. We still fiercely desire control over our environment, and we still harbor deep resentments toward other people.
Precisely, those raw human emotions don't vanish simply because society tells us to smile. Since those aggressive impulses cannot be legally or socially expressed through a raised fist or a shouting match, they are driven underground.
They seep out sideways in socially acceptable, deniable ways. This is why people are chronically, unapologetically late to meetings they secretly didn't want to attend.
It's why they offer carefully worded, backhanded compliments that sting but can't be reported. It's why an employee will agree to take on a project, but then execute it so slowly, with so many manufactured errors, that the manager eventually throws up their hands and does the work themselves out of sheer frustration.
The smiling tiger is everywhere. And the ultimate danger for you, the listener, when dealing with one of these people, is the public relations battle.
The modus operandi of the passive-aggressive individual is the manufacturing of doubt. They're always positioned as the innocent, confused bystander. Let's look at a modern office scenario.
You have a coworker who is constantly accidentally forgetting to send you the crucial data you need to finish your reports. Week after week, they sabotage your deadlines.
Finally, the pressure builds, the dam breaks, and you snap. You march over to their desk and yell at them in the middle of the open plan office. who instantly looks like the bad guy to everyone else in the room.
You do. You look completely unhinged. You look like a hostile, abusive coworker.
They win the PR battle instantly. They get to sit there looking shocked, their eyes wide, saying, "I'm so sorry, I just forgot. I've been so busy. Why are you screaming at me?"
And suddenly, the entire narrative shifts. Management is no longer focused on their months of covert sabotage. Everyone is entirely focused on your inappropriate, angry outburst.
You lose your professional credibility, and they secure their status as the victim. The guilt, the profound confusion, and the rage you feel in the aftermath of that interaction is the exact measure of the power they hold over you.
Because of that danger, we must pivot to the most crucial part of this deep dive. How do you survive? How do you shield yourself from the psychological warfare without losing your mind or your career?
The text lays out very specific, actionable defensive strategies.
The first line of defense the text offers is fundamentally internal. It requires extreme self-awareness. You have to train your brain to recognize the blame-shifting tactic the very moment it is deployed.
When you are interacting with someone and you suddenly feel a wave of irrational guilt or deep confusion or paranoia about your own competence, you have to stop and interrogate that feeling.
The source material specifically highlights that passive-aggressive individuals frequently utilize intense flattery as bait to draw you into their web. They are expert psychological profilers.
They identify your specific insecurities and they prey on them. They make you feel incredibly special, intelligent, or indispensable. They build you up so that when they inevitably begin their subtle sabotage, your brain refuses to see it.
You doubt your own perception because this person has been so nice to you. You have to recognize that your own desperate need for validation might be the exact weakness they're exploiting to pull you into their dynamic.
Once you achieve that self-awareness and realize you are dealing with a smiling tiger, the second step is paramount. Disengage and stay calm.
Under no circumstances can you allow your frustration to boil over into overt anger. Do not send the furious all-caps email at 11 p.m. Do not confront them aggressively in the hallway.
As we just discussed, if you cause a scene, you play directly into their hands and become the villain in their carefully constructed narrative of victimhood. The ideal solution, whenever possible, is to simply remove them from your life, transfer them off your team, or find a new job.
But the text acknowledges that retreat isn't always an option. What if the smiling tiger is a manager you report to, or a massive client you cannot afford to lose, or, as the historical text points out, treacherous soldiers within your own ranks?
For those situations, the text provides a counter-strategy based on the actions of the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés.
This is a fascinating historical translation. Cortés is in the midst of conquering Mexico, heavily outnumbered by the indigenous empires, and suddenly he realizes he has a massive problem within his own camp.
He discovers that a faction of his own soldiers are outwardly accepting his orders, but secretly plotting treason to overthrow him. If he calls them out publicly and executes them, he risks sparking a full-blown mutiny that will destroy his entire expedition.
Instead of fighting fire with water, Cortés fights fire with fire. He maintains a completely friendly, oblivious facade. He doesn't let on for a single second that he knows about the treason.
He mirrors their passive aggression. Behind the scenes, he begins subtly reassigning duties, quietly isolating the treacherous men from one another and from the main armory.
He then engineers situations, deployments, or scouting missions that force these men to reveal their treachery openly, at which point he can arrest and deal with them under the full justified weight of military law without risking a mutiny.
We have to translate this for the listener, though, because 16th century military tactics don't directly map to a Tuesday morning on Slack. Let's role-play this. How do I apply the Cortés method to that toxic coworker who keeps forgetting to send me the data?
You neutralize their weapon by reflecting it back at them, but with the paper trail. You remain endlessly polite and cheerful, but you stop relying on them verbally.
If they verbally promise to send the data, you immediately send a brightly toned email summarizing the conversation and copying the project manager, saying, "Just confirming you'll have those numbers to me by Thursday so we can hit our Friday deadline. Thanks so much for your hard work on this."
You are building a trap. When Thursday comes and they inevitably fail to deliver, you don't yell. You reply to that same thread, "Hey, just bubbling this up. Let me know if you're running into technical issues."
You use extreme politeness to publicly document their incompetence. You force them out into the open. If they are chronically late to meetings, you don't scold them. You simply start the meeting exactly on time, make the crucial decisions in the first 5 minutes without them.
And when they arrive, you cheerfully say, "Oh, we assumed you were tied up. We've already finalized the budget strategy." You make them experience the highly irritating, tangible consequences of their own behavior without ever openly declaring war or raising your voice.
It is exhausting, but it works. However, there is a fourth defense, detailed in the text, that applies specifically to close, personal relationships, like a marriage or a deep friendship. Where engaging in a protracted, underhanded counterinsurgency campaign is deeply unhealthy.
In those intimate spaces, the text says you must actively create safe spaces for negativity.
It sounds incredibly counterintuitive to invite negativity into your home,
Yeah.
right? I mean, most couples strive to never fight at all.
But a complete absence of conflict is often a symptom of suppression. If your partner is constantly resorting to passive aggression, like the mysterious dizzy spells we discussed, or chronically forgetting to run errands, it is almost always because they feel it is psychologically unsafe to express overt negative feelings, or they feel they have no legitimate venue to openly negotiate for control in the relationship.
To diffuse the passive aggression, you have to actively encourage them to express their criticisms, their anger, and their desires openly. You have to say, "It is okay to be angry with me. Let's argue about this right now."
It might be incredibly painful and difficult to hear those criticisms initially, but open, honest conflict is infinitely easier to manage and vastly healthier for the relationship than enduring years of covert, soul-crushing sabotage. You have to remove their psychological need to be underhanded by making it safe for them to be overt.
Before we wrap this deep dive, the source material offers one final aggressive twist on this entire concept. It is a strategy called the reversal, or aggressive passivity.
This strategy essentially flips everything we've discussed today upside down. Throughout this deep dive, we've analyzed people who are inwardly strong and plotting, but outwardly present themselves as weak and compliant.
The reversal dictates that if you are actually genuinely weak and vulnerable in a conflict, you should project a wildly hostile, blustery, aggressive front while inwardly staying completely calm and planning absolutely no action.
It is the ultimate poker bluff. Imagine you are cornered in a negotiation or a social conflict and you hold absolutely no leverage. Instead of cowering, you put up a terrifying front.
You raise your voice, you make massive threats, you puff out your chest, and you act entirely unhinged. The sheer intimidation factor keeps your enemies at bay because they simply cannot believe anyone would act with such extreme, reckless aggression if they didn't have a massive hidden weapon or a brilliant plan to back it up.
They retreat because they assume you hold a winning hand, completely unaware that your aggression is entirely hollow.
It relies on the exact same psychological vulnerability we discussed at the beginning. People judge you based on the front you present. Whether you're facing the false surrender of a general, the smiling tiger in the adjoining cubicle, or the aggressive bluff of a weak opponent, the ultimate defense always comes down to protecting your own mental real estate.
The text concludes with a haunting quote from Sun Haichen's commentary on the wiles of war. "As dripping water wears through rock, so the weak and yielding can subdue the firm and strong."
Dripping water. That image perfectly captures the terror of this strategy.
Passive aggression is the dripping water. It doesn't destroy you in one explosive blast. It works slowly, methodically. It erodes your confidence, your sanity, and your strategic footing drop by drop over months or years.
The only true way to defend against it is to deny them the time and the space to take root in your mind. You cannot let them rent space in your head. You must recognize the game they are playing, aggressively detach yourself emotionally from their behavior, and ensure that the water drips harmlessly onto the floor instead of slowly boring a hole through your foundation.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together. What an intense, paradigm-shifting journey this has been. We started by exploring the philosophy of the river, learning how yielding to kinetic force allows you to channel and control its energy.
We watched Mahatma Gandhi expertly weaponize the moral guilt of the British Empire, paralyzing an entire army with his absolute refusal to resist. We saw Prince Metternich lock the Tsar of Russia in a claustrophobic web of flattery and agreement, subtly tricking his greatest rival into destroying his own ideological cause.
We examine the devastating power of the false surrender through Dessalines in Haiti, and the brilliance of manufactured reluctance employed by FDR and the Roman Caesars, proving definitively that fiercely hiding your ambition is often the fastest, most effective way to achieve it.
And we brought those grand historical concepts right down to the ground floor of our everyday lives. We identified the smiling tigers prowling our offices, we exposed the psychopathological power struggles hidden within our own homes, and we laid out the vital defenses, relentless self-awareness, calm disengagement, and fighting fire with meticulously documented fire that we need to survive them.
We have seen that true, unassailable power often disguises itself as absolute helplessness.
It completely rewires how we must observe the social world around us. And if we connect these psychological mechanisms to the broader trajectory of our culture, it leaves us with a profoundly unsettling question to consider.
We discussed how modern society systematically suppresses and punishes overt aggression, and how that very suppression serves as the breeding ground for covert, passive-aggressive behavior. So take that to its logical extreme. Imagine a future society where all physical and verbal conflict is entirely 100% culturally taboo.
A world where no one is ever allowed to raise their voice, express a negative thought, or engage in direct confrontation without facing severe social ruin. Does that society finally achieve a perfect utopian peace?
Or does it inevitably degenerate into a silent psychological war zone where absolutely everyone is a smiling tiger, locked in a permanent, exhausting stalemate of extreme, weaponized politeness? Pay very close attention to the absolute most polite people in your life tomorrow.
That is a chilling thought to end on. A silent war zone of weaponized politeness. I am definitely going to be looking at my excessively friendly coworkers through a very different lens tomorrow morning.
It's going to change how you see everything.
And for you listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some clarity and a few new tools to navigate those murky, dangerous waters of human behavior. So the next time you feel like you're losing your mind in a relationship or a workplace dynamic, remember the river, remember the dripping water, and stay endlessly curious. Keep your eyes open. We'll catch you on the next one.